Yep, officially recording now.
Awesome sauce. Well,
Avoid
I'm
little.
ready. I'm ready whenever you all are for the questions and the comments and the whatevers.
Well, Christian had a very important question earlier. I couldn't really answer in full for him.
Okay. Um, well, I'm sorry. Let me introduce who I am for the start of your video there, so people aren't like, "Who the hell is this guy?" So I'm Terrell Brown. Hello. I've been a ham radio operator, or also an amateur radio operator. Amateur radio service is the actual name of who we are, what we do. Ham radio, ham is a colloquial expression. Nobody fully understands what it means. It's not really important. But my call sign is K4TLB. That's Kilo 4 Tango Lima Bravo. That is a vanity call sign. So when I upgraded to my second level, the general class license ticket. So there are 3 license levels right now. I'm at the second level. I got my vanity call sign because I thought it'd be cool. Anyway, so I've been a ham radio operator now for 16 years. So, and I messed with CB radio quite a bit before that. So that's who I am. Hello. Go ahead.
Hi, Terrell.
Hi. I think Christian had a question. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Christian. Go ahead.
No, you're good. I don't remember said question.
Your question was, what is ham radio and why does it require a license?
Ah, um, that is a really good question, and it's a very it's got a to me it's got a really good answer. It's an important question. A lot of people wonder why, if you don't need a license for CB radio or FRS or the few other radio services that are sort of freely available to people, why do you need one for ham radio? Well, that's because ham radio and all the capabilities that the FCC gives that service the ability to do, ham radio can be very damaging to other services, both wired and wireless. We can operate in a lot of instances up to 2,000 watts of power. That's on par with low power commercial FM and AM radio stations, if you think about it. Yeah, they're not going to get out very, if we are an FM broadcast station, 2,000 watts is a very local radio station, but that's still a lot of power and it can cause a lot of damage and interference. And there are just a lot of things we can do um, that go beyond things like CB radio, GMRS, and FRS. So they just want to make sure that, hey, before you start transmitting on any of the allowed frequencies and any of the allowed modes, modes being data, voice, Morse code, which what we call CW, carrier wave. We don't really call it Morse code. You just use Morse code. Um, Before you use any of those modes, they want to make sure you know what the hell you're doing and not, mess anything up. So uh, it requires, you take for the first level technician class, it's a relatively easy test. I mean, you can definitely fail it. It's not like you can just walk into the classroom without having read anything, not classroom, but the testing session without having read anything and take the test and pass it. Maybe a few people can. Uh, but they just want to make sure that you know what you're doing before you start messing with that kind of equipment, with that kind of power. Um, and you can also hurt yourself and other people with high powered, electronics. People can get electrocuted. People can get radiation burns. More, and by radiation burns, I mean, if you're standing too close to an antenna and somebody transmits at high power on that antenna, you can suffer a burn from that antenna. So there's very real danger involved in ham radio. It's rare, but if you don't know what you're doing, you can hurt yourself and other people, or you can cause interference or damage to other services, cell phones, public safety, um, that that warehouse business uh, a couple blocks down the street from you. so on and so forth. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there he is.
That's probably a really long answer, but I mean that's the best answer I think I can give, like off the top of my head.
I had a question, just a random one that's already popping a bit beyond starting from the beginning. But earlier I was because I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos on ham radio since yesterday, which I'm sitting at home with nothing to do, so I watched a lot of videos, more than my brain could absorb in one time.
No, I understand that.
But someone talked about the fact that some radios can actually also work on the FRS, which, if I'm not mistaken, that's the two-way walkie-talkies. But then they said you can use it to listen, but if you start talking on it, it could be a problem because it's not legal or something. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I can address that.
Okay.
So this is one of the things that I've had to repeat myself a lot to people, because they say, oh, I got this radio that can work on UHF. And UHF is usually that frequency band that most people know of in the 400 megahertz area. So ham radio has a slice of that. Typically, it's between 420 megahertz and 450 megahertz. We usually operate ham radio for talking usually is operating in the 440 to 450 range. That's where we have a lot of repeaters. GMRS and FRS operate above that in the 460s, I think is where it is. So if you look up FRS frequencies and GMRS frequencies, they will tell you when you have those radios, particularly the FRS radios, they have channels. And each channel corresponds to a specific frequency. And some of those are shared between FRS and GMRS. The problem with FRS is any radio that is set up for FRS communications has to operate at a maximum power. And I don't remember what the wattage is, but it's less than a watt. Look it up. And the antennas have to be fixed. So you cannot remove the antenna. You cannot have the ability to remove the antenna. You also a very low transmit power is all that's allowed. The antenna has to be fixed, and essentially that means it has to be a handheld.
Right.
And that's why if you have your own ham, whether it's a ham radio or a GMRS radio, that was, people have GMRS radios that are like commercial type radios, or they're built more like ham radios. You cannot use those radios to talk on FRS because the FCC has very strict rules on the design of FRS radios, and companies have to stick to that.
It's a safety issue.
Yeah, but it's okay to listen because if you're
not transmitting,
you're not transmitting to, and it's an open frequency, so they put them on the radio so you can listen. So I guess like if you were, like say if you were a park ranger with a ham radio and you knew people were out there on trails or something, as an example, you'd be able to hear the conversations they were having on their radios.
Exactly.
Emergency purposes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. You can listen all you want. FRS. Now I heard emergency service. I mean, FRS itself you can use it basically to do whatever you want, much like CB radio. It's just there are very strict limitations on the type of radio you can talk on. But yeah, if you can hear something on a radio frequency, then you can listen to it all you want. So if you got a scanner or a ham radio or a commercial type radio, which are usually very similar to ham radios, or whatever, you can listen all you want, no license required. The GMRS side of a lot of those FRS radios that you get, as you may already know, you need a license to talk on any GMRS frequency, period. Even the ones that's shared with FRS. If you are talking on that frequency, and it's set up for GMRS, you need a license, period.
And what is GMRS?
GMRS is can't remember exactly what it stands for. It's General Mobile Radio Service. It's I don't remember how old it is. We ham radio operators have always joked that the FCC has tried to kill that service. Basically, because the last time I checked, the license cost was $85. It may have come down a little bit, but it's really expensive compared to getting a ham radio license or just using FRS. Uh, but you don't have to take a test. You just apply for the license, and they're really loose about how you use that license. So like the idea is you get it, like if I get the license, anyone in my family can use that license, and you don't have to.
Or for
What's
ham.
that? What's that?
RS.
For GMRS?
For GMRS. Anyone in my immediate family can use that call sign, use that license, not the call sign, because when you're using GMRS, just like in FRS and CB radio, you don't have to identify who you are. In ham radio, you have to occasionally say your call sign. K4, this is, every 10 minutes, I have to say this is K4TLB, just so it's clear who's talking on this radio. But in GMRS, you don't do that. They give you a call sign, but that's just a license with some letters and numbers on it. It says you're allowed to use these GMRS frequencies. That's it. Now, GMRS has more flexibility than FRS. You can have different types of radios. So a lot of the radios we use for ham radio, you can use for GMRS. But there are power limitations. There are antenna design limitations. You can use repeaters with GMRS, just like with ham radio, but there are just more restrictions on all that.
So what do people typically use GMRS for? Just
well, what the FCC says you should use it for is like family activities, hunting activities. General outdoor activities. Whatever you feel like you have a need for it. It's not recommended for business use. I don't think they keep businesses from using it for that, but you can use it for that if you want to.
I can see now, because those little FRS radios, those little walkie-talkies, for being so low on power, for being so so much under a CB for power, they very frequently have farther range than a CB does.
So
that's why the power limitations are there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the and range is, there's a lot of deception on range.
Cloud cover.
So yeah, well, cloud cover, trees, building obstacles. So the two fundamentals between CB radio, let's just talk about CB radio and FRS. The two fundamental differences between those is power and the frequency range that they operate in. CB radio operates way down to what we call the HF bands, high frequency, in the 28 megahertz, 29 megahertz, somewhere in there, 28 I can't remember, 27 and 28 megahertz, I think is where CB radio is. And we actually called it the 11 meter band because the wavelength generally for CB radio is 11 meters. And the properties of those radio frequencies down there have a better, actually can potentially travel hundreds, if not thousands of miles in really good conditions, but they could travel hundreds of miles. But because FCC regulates that power down to 4 watts, that's rare. But you should be able to talk across the county on a CB radio rig if everything was set up right.
Right.
You should be able to talk 2 counties over. Now, if you look at an FRS radio packaging and it says like it's got 30 miles of range or 50 miles of range, yeah, okay, yeah, whatever. All that's a bunch of BS. They can claim that.
I was going more from practical application where unless you spend a decent bit to get all your CB stuff set up really well, like go to Uari had a handheld 50-watt Cobra and occasionally could hear someone in the ride. If they were more than 2 vehicle lengths away, I couldn't get them. Then when I got my good CB, I can get like 3-4 miles of range on it.
So one of the issues again, with radio frequencies, take a sheet of paper and scale down the difference between 70 centimeters and 11 meters. That's a really big difference, right? So FRS and GMRS operate in what we call the 70 centimeter band. In ham radio, that's what we call it, 70 centimeters. That's how wide the bandwidth, not bandwidth, but the wavelengths are. Again, with CB radio, 11 meters. In some cases, the radio frequency is skipping over you in that convoy of Jeeps. Usually, if a Jeep's right in front of you and you talk on your CB radio and they can hear you, it's just because their radio is able to pick up the immediate strength of the radio signal coming out of your radio, maybe right off the antenna. But if you're like 2 Jeeps in front and they can't hear you, it's just you all just happen to meet the funny situation that happens a lot of the radio frequency because it's so big, skipping over you. And the person in the 4th Jeep in the convoy can hear you, but the 3rd Jeep in the convoy can't.
Here, let me see your pencil.
I
know exactly.
Well, I know what he's saying. I can see it in my head, but
you're recording.
That's true.
I had neighbors, and they had these like 80, 90-foot antennas in their yards, and they were ham radio enthusiasts. What was that?
You're asking what was that?
Yeah.
So when you say 80, 90 feet, you mean like the tower was 80 feet or 90 feet?
That versus that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to actually show the camera.
Hold on. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, and Christian, I'll get to your question in just a second. So yeah, we deal with that a lot, and the reason why you can better hear the FRS and GMRS radio signals or ham radio operating in those similar areas is because
the links are close.
The wavelength
now.
is much smaller. So
it's not that necessarily that it has a greater range. It's just more people in a group will be able to hear it because the wavelengths are closer together, so it'll pick them up.
Yes, exactly. So Christian asked about his neighbors having, ham radio enthusiasts, some kind of radio enthusiasts having a tower in their yard or towers that were 80, 90 feet in the air. So those are literally is what it is. It's a tower. Now they could have anything on top of that tower. They could have a vertical antenna that's for CB or for ham radio. It could be, or they could have wire antennas coming off of it. Sometimes you'll see them in a delta or a triangular configuration, or you might see some other long wire configuration attached to those antennas. For ham radio and really any radio service, height is the key.
Yeah, the more you can get above the treetops, the better the signal is going to be.
For the most part, yes. Now there are some situations that if you're too high or you're running too much feed line with the cable running from your radio to the antenna
versus wrapping versus there's a couple of different things.
Or just having too long. So like in the world of IT, if you go beyond the operational limits of a Cat5e cable, then you have signal degradation. Similar situation happens with ham radio. So you don't want to you shouldn't run any more cable than you need to get your signal from the radio to the antenna. But generally, with antennas, the higher above the ground, the better your signal can get out into the world. So my club, the Guilford Amateur Society, we have a repeater that extends our range of anyone talking into that repeater. It's on the Channel 2 radio tower, which is in Level Cross, North Carolina. If you don't know where Level Cross is, it's between Greensboro and Randleman. All right. And so if you've ever driven down 220, you will know. Hey, Thomas.
Finally got on.
Hey, man. Good to see you.
April in here to set it up.
As an FYI, we are recording this because some people wanted to watch it later. Are you okay with being recorded?
I don't care.
Okay.
Oh, awesome. So I was just answering a question, Thomas, about antenna towers and why people have, so Christian, who's listening,
Right.
asked why do people have like 80, 90 foot antenna towers?
Right.
Well, that's to get antennas above the ground. So, and I was getting to my club's repeater we have in Level Cross, which is between Randleman, North Carolina, and Greensboro. So if you drive down 220, which I think is now I-73 or whatever, you will see a couple of really tall, towers, and where we have our repeater on one of them, and the antenna. There are two antennas. There's a receive antenna and a transmit antenna, and they are up at like 1,400 feet. So that allows our repeater to see a lot of the horizon. So the more horizon your antennas can see, particularly when we're talking about the usual local radios people use, VHF and UHF radios, then the more horizon you can see, the more people you can reach out to and talk to, and the more that they can talk back to you. So I can take my little cheap $30 Chinese VHF or UHF radio, and I can be all the way in, I don't know what's past Wednesday. I can be in Statesville, potentially, and because that huge tower is 1,400 feet. Well, it's actually a 2,000-foot tower, but our antenna is at 1,400 feet. It can see so much of the horizon that my signal from Statesville could potentially talk to that repeater. So height above ground is paramount.
So, question about repeaters. I was trying to understand some stuff about them that I was seeing in a video. One of the things they were saying is it receives you on one frequency and then sends the signal back out on
Yes.
another. Okay.
Yes. So with phones, phones are what we call, and you probably know this term, full duplex. That means on the same channel, I can hear and talk to you. There's no switching around going on. Well, ham radio can't do that. It's half duplex. So here's a microphone, and we used to see this a lot in movies. You might still see this in movies. People are just like holding down the microphone and they're talking, and the other person is talking and they're hearing them, and they're like having an argument back and forth on a two-way radio. You can't do that in real life. No, but if I'm holding down the microphone yelling at you, you can't say something on the other end that cuts me off and I'm like all insulted. No, I have to let off this microphone in order for you to speak into it and me hear you. They can hold down their end of the mic and talk all they want, but as long as I'm holding this thing down, I can't hear them, and then they're not going to hear me. So what repeaters allow us to do is receive a signal on one frequency, and we transmit it back on another. So if I am running a net, which I do sometimes, and I'm talking to a bunch of people listening, I am talking on one frequency. They are hearing me on another frequency. That's what the repeater allows to do. And vice versa. When they come back, they talk on one frequency and it retransmits the signal on another frequency. So does that make sense?
No, that makes sense. What I was curious about with it is,
okay.
Is the repeater meant for you to be able to talk and a bunch of people to be able to listen primarily, or is it set up for communication back and forth? So like if you were talking to somebody who was a great distance away and would you be using the repeater, and then would they be talking back to you? And then would you run into that issue like because you're both talking and it's retransmitting on the frequency?
I know the term for the CB is the pig squeal. When two people have a mic, the two people have a mic going.
Now that still happens. Okay, yeah. I just realized, yeah, this is kind of a tricky subject to discuss because, like if we were just all listening on one frequency, I can talk to you, I can talk at you, and everyone can hear me. So repeaters do a couple of things. One, they extend the range so more people can communicate than with just talking radio to radio, talking direct. What it also allows is, well, like I said, if you're talking on one frequency and transmitting on another. Um, see, now I lost my train of thought on that. But anyway, to answer your question, yes, the purpose of it is to allow you to talk to many people over a wide distance and them to communicate back to you efficiently. And the best way to do that is to split the frequencies you're using. Have one frequency for listening, one frequency for transmitting. The radios are set up to automatically, when you key down the mic, it will automatically transmit on the right frequency. But when you release it, it will receive on the listening frequency. So yeah, it
Okay.
just it helps keep traffic from colliding. Yes, two people can still key down their mic at the same time and not realize it, and then people listening will hear the squill or the interference, the two signals trying to fight for the repeater. Yeah.
Well, but people probably, for the most part,
Try to avoid it.
do like they would normally do on radio, which is wait for someone to say they're done transmitting and then transmit.
Yeah, correct. So when we run a net, and forgive me, my brain isn't working on like exactly why the repeater, why we set repeaters up the way. But when we run a net, we give specific instructions to people and say, hey, I need to make sure I'm not transmitting. Okay. Excuse me. So we tell people to, I'll say call net control, which is me if I'm running the net. And I'll tell them, say, call net control, release the mic and make sure no one else is transmitting. So they release the mic and they listen. Okay, nobody is transmitting. And then they key back on and finish their check-in or whatever that was they were saying. So key down, net control, release, not hearing anything. Okay, I can go back and then I'll say my calls. This is Terrell, K4TLB, check me in. And then I'll release it. And the next person will do that. So we do give instructions to try and cut down the collisions. That helps out with having a lot of people using a repeater. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Not sure if I'm coming across right sometimes. So
it's basically ending every statement with over. Just it's different for y'all.
Yeah, well, we typically don't say over. Usually, like with a repeater, we let the repeater. Some repeaters have a tone on it that lets you know that the person has finished talking, and sometimes there's what we call the tail end of the squelch. It'll you can tell that the repeater has stopped transmitting. Or stopped receiving on the receive side, and it'll stop transmitting on and you just know that the person has stopped talking on the repeater, and then you just go. So some repeaters have a beep or a tone that tells you the person is done. Some don't, but generally we do not say over when we're done saying a statement. Over.
Well, since Thomas just joined, does Thomas have any questions?
Such a dork.
Not really. I was just listening in what y'all chatting on.
Yeah.
So I understand little bits of it here and there on stuff, and then with CBs, I've done that for quite a while. So
yeah.
The height for the antenna and all, I understand all that with it from the CBs. The higher you get your antenna with it, the more it puts out. The clearer it is with a CB too. If for a base at the house, they like for you to be, everything clears up the higher it gets. You don't get as much static and stuff.
With with a CB was 18 feet is where that's where you're going to get, at that point, you're getting the bare minimum. You can actually get something, and at anything below that, you're getting nothing.
Do what now?
I'm sorry, at 18 feet. Go ahead.
For the CB radios at 18 feet, where you start, you can start receiving and transmitting over a home base. It makes it easier. At anything below about 18 feet, you don't really get anything.
Are you saying height above the ground or?
Yeah, height above the ground.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, it all really depends on your setup. So, because, people have CB radios on their cars, and Jeeps, and
Different
they,
antenna though. I'm referring to the home base antenna.
No, you're correct. You are correct. The problem with what we call mobile antennas is they are typically a massive compromise. Anything like, especially the 2 meters, so 144 megahertz and down, usually those antennas are compromises over, because 2 meters is really long. And typically, usually the best antennas you can get is what we either call like a half wave antenna. So it's half the length of the radio wavelength you're trying to operate at, or 5/8 of the length of that of the wavelength of the frequency you're trying to operate at. We try to get antennas as close to our ideal transmitting range as possible, and CB radio is 11 meters. So I mean, if you had a half of 11 meters, you can't stick an antenna like that on a car. You can put it on top of a 80-foot tower or on top of your house, and it's totally fine for the most part. If you look at a lot of those Fire Sticks, if you to deconstruct those things, you'll see a bunch of thin wire, because they can fit around. Yeah, it's round. It's wound around this and the fiberglass or whatever material they're using. If you were to uncoil that, you're going to get a really long piece of conductor wire, and if you measure it, it might be half of 11 meters. I don't know. I've never taken one apart like that to see, but they compromise by winding that cable around the stick, and then it's still probably not even close to half the length of the wavelength, and so that's why you have to tune them. You have to play with where they're positioned and adjust the tips. Some of them have adjustable tips at the top. Some of them you have to snip the wire, the coiled wire from the very top down. If you go too far, you done screwed it up. But yeah, that's why you have to do a little bit at a time. It's nice to get the ones that have the screw that you adjust, and then you put the cap back on to protect it. Sometimes your tuning has to do with the cable that's feeding from the radio to the antenna. That's got to be, there's certain length restrictions with that. And grounding your radio is a good part of tuning the antenna as well.
Yep. Grounding the antenna, grounding the radio, all that has to be done right. Your antenna, your cable links is the other thing, like you was saying, play in with it. I think it's every 3 foot for the CB. You want it 3 foot increments. I know on the vehicle, supposedly you don't have to do any adjusting if it's 102-inch whip. So that gives you how long the antenna has to be on the vehicle, supposedly not to have to adjust it if everything's right.
Yeah, the 102.
The one I have on the side of my house is the antenna itself is 18 foot long, and I've got the base of the antenna 30 foot up.
Yeah.
So they say you want your base 10 foot above the top of the house, and that's pretty much what I did when I put mine up. So I measured it to get it about 10 foot off the base of my house.
Yeah.
And so my tip's up, whatever, but they say the higher you get them, the better you get out of the power line, static, and all that stuff. That 50 foot is what a lot of them say is the minimum on getting good. But 100 foot, they say they clear out, and it's real clear, and you can talk really good then. But
if you ever went on top of like a parking deck, like in, I don't know, downtown Greensboro or downtown Winston-Salem or wherever, and imagine now some of those parking decks might be, I don't know, 80 feet, 100 feet high. Just depends on how many stories, but probably not that much because it depends on how many stories the parking deck is. But a lot of those parking decks, when you get on top, you can see the horizon quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so some of them are like maybe 40, 50, 60 feet in the air. And we're talking people with towers in their backyard that are 80 to 100 feet. I think legally,
99.
there are some what's that?
199 feet before you need an actual FCC license because of planes.
Yeah, well, and above 200 feet, above 200 feet, yeah, you need a FCC. You need a license for the tower, and you need lights on the tower to for aircraft so they can see it. So yeah, you get into some major restrictions. I don't know many people with towers that go above 100 feet. My camera said it changed. Anyway, can you all hear me?
Yeah,
I hear you.
Can't see anymore.
Okay, my video preview froze. Can you still see me?
No.
It keeps trying.
Oh, interesting.
I got a question.
Go for it.
World War One, they had those balloons signal boosters. Well, if you built something like that, what would you need to do to build something like that to have that 190-foot antenna in the air?
I mean, what would you need to do that?
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not trying to be funny by saying this. You need a balloon.
Well, a weather balloon, a small weather balloon would be able to do that.
Yeah, and then you need a way to attach your antenna wire. Usually you're going to be running a wire up there. So you need to be able to hold the wire without conducting electricity between the wire and the balloon. So you need an insulator between the cable that's holding the wire attached to the balloon and the antenna itself. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And then you just let the balloon float up to your desired height. Don't do anything illegal, of course. Although I don't think it's. I mean, weather balloons aren't considered towers, so I think technically you could probably draw a wire up as far as you wanted to go. You just you run the risk of aircraft flying through and getting tangled up in your wire. So you may want to check the legality of that. But yeah, you just run the wire up there, and you obviously need to have cable running from your radio to the base of that wire or antenna that you're putting up there. But yeah, that's really all it is you're holding the wire. You just need it to be insulated from the balloon, and you do your thing.
All right, that'd be pretty cool. That'd be a way to have a signal booster.
Yeah, you could do it like that.
I don't remember if it was during the Cold War or World War II. I think it was during the Cold War or something. They the U.S. government launched a bunch of metal shavings into orbit just to extend the reach of ham radio.
Oh, so they did scatter. So that's interesting. I actually didn't know that. I'm trying to think why they would have done that.
To recreate what the clouds do.
Well, yeah. So the thing is, though, at with most HF frequencies below, I don't know, let's say in the 20 megahertz and down, most of those HF frequencies bounce off of the ionosphere and not really clouds. Yeah, clouds do play some role in, maybe with what we call 10 meters, so that's the 28 to 29 megahertz. They might be doing some bouncing off of the clouds. There's a phenomenon called tropospheric ducting. Yep. So literally, there's a tunnel of clouds in the atmosphere somewhere, and so some of our radio frequencies will when you transmit out, they will get trapped in that duct. and they will bounce back and forth, and they can travel tens of miles, hundreds of miles, or thousands of miles. And then people on the other end, so we call those openings. People on the other end can hear us.
Christian looked it up.
What's that?
Operation Westford.
Oh, I don't know what that is. Operation Westford.
That was where they
the metal shavings.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
Well, if I remember right, it's kind of like with radar. I remember with the basic fishing radar.
Yeah.
The fishing boat radar, you can get 30 miles, but I remember on the ship that we could get 40, 50 miles on an extremely cloudy day, and it's because the clouds act like mirrors when it comes to signals.
Yeah. And with ham radio, we use a lot of
sight.
Yeah, we use a lot of different weather phenomenon to get our signal out. I mean, a lot of meteorology goes into ham radio propagation, and the same is true for any radio service that's trying to get their signal around the world, or at least over a wide region. We also use a lot of astrological. No, a lot of astronomical phenomenon. For example, if you ever hear of the gray line, so between pitch black and daytime, obviously you got that, that dusk, from dusk till dawn. Yeah, so dusk or dawn. If you ever look at a map as it shows day and night moving across a map, you can tell where the gray line is. It's where, the sun is setting. And some of our radio frequencies work really well along that line. So we wait for it. Like right now is a perfect time for me to try and talk to, I don't know, Italy or France, or depending on where that, the other side of that gray line falls, where it's dawn. It's dusk here, it's dawn somewhere else. I might have a good chance of talking to where it's dawn right now. Does that make sense? So we use a lot of weird meteorological and astronomical phenomenon to do our thing. Sunspots play a huge role in how well our radio frequencies do or do not get around the world. If during a period
actually hurt it.
Well, I mean, in a lot of cases, a lot of high sunspot activity actually improves our radio frequency. It helps in some frequencies, it hurts in others. So it really depends on where you're talking and what you're trying to do.
I know. My thing is at 80 feet, 2,000 watts, you're getting a pretty good distance.
Oh. What? Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
If you're 80, 90 feet in the air and 2,000 watts, that's a pretty good distance for transmit.
Yeah. So, and the issue with 2,000 watts, like 2,000 watts is the typical that's typical maximum what we call peak envelope power. So basically, the power coming out of the back of the radio going into the antenna. 2,000 watts is a lot. It's often too much. Most radios that you buy either operate at 100 watts or 50 watts or 25 watts. Yeah. Those are for like the mobile or base radios. The handheld radios usually operate like at most 7 watts or 5 watts. So those are good for local talk, but the higher power stuff is good for longer range. For the HF radios, the ones that operate at much lower frequencies, those you really could use those 100 watts to get your voice out. Voice over radio uses a lot of power, but if you're doing Morse code, what we call CW, you don't need a whole lot of power to get that signal around the world. Most CW operators operate at 10 watts or less. I shouldn't say most, a lot do. The ones that want to be buttholes and stomp all over everyone, they will use their CW at really high power, but it's not necessary. It's not fun because you're causing other people not to be able to be heard by other stations because your signal is so big and powerful unnecessarily that other people can't be heard. So some people use that as a tactic to get a contact because they can be heard more than the lower power people. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I heard there's like contests and awards you can win for how many people you contact, or
so many contests, so many awards. They have there are or recognition. So like there's one for contacting all 50 states. There's one for contacting every county in every state of the United States. Can you imagine making a contact with every county? And there are people that have done it. That's how insane that is. There are recognitions and awards for contacting someone in every country, contacting every island that has its own ham radio service. Any island nations or an island owned by a nation. There are competitions or QSO parties. QSO is short ham radio shorthand for conversation. And so there are contests and there are QSO parties or conversation parties where it's just, hey, here's the theme, everyone. Let's just get on here and make as many contacts between each other as possible. So each state has like their own QSO party. Like there's the North Carolina QSO party where we pick a weekend of the year and all the rest of the country or the world tries to contact stations in North Carolina. So that's the North Carolina QSO party. And vice versa for Virginia. Everyone tries to get Virginia. And it's just a opportunity for people in North Carolina to make a bunch of contacts around the country or the world because everyone's looking for people in North Carolina. That's hence the QSO party. We used to have, and we might still have it, they had the Guilford military battleground park. They would set up radio stations and they would do a commemorative weekend of people contacting stations there at the battleground at the park to say, hey, you're making contact. I don't remember what call sign they used, but it was just recognition that we're commemorating the battle that took place here at Guilford Courthouse is what I was trying to say, Guilford Courthouse. And, it's just another thing for people to add to their list of contacts. Like I contacted this special event station is what we call some of them, special event station that was commemorating some event. And it's just it's another reason to get on the radio. Sometimes it's for something cool. Sometimes it's for something not very interesting. Depends on what you're into.
Yeah.
Aw, no, look at that. That's cute. What y'all drinking? Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Okay.
We're Americans, thank you.
They're both coffee addicts.
Beer.
Can I have
You said they're American.
The creamer too.
I'm sorry, the British. No, the British
Oh,
drink
man.
the tea.
What's that?
We drink the coffee. We threw the tea in the harbor.
I like tea.
I drink coffee and tea. Anyway, so yeah, hopefully all that made sense. So yeah, there are. See, my camera says it's on, but I don't see my preview, so I don't know if you all are seeing me.
Well, I can see you right
we
now.
see you.
Oh, awesome. So, well, hopefully I don't pick my nose.
I know my Skype every now and again will just take one of y'all's images and put it up over my preview in the corner, and then I have to go close it out. A lot of times it'll do it if I open a browser on the other window.
Okay, because I was freaking out that you weren't able to see me. I think there were several times you couldn't. So yeah, I think it was a power issue I was having, but I got it resolved. So yeah, there are competitions that people are literally competing against either individuals or groups. There are QSO parties, conversation parties, which is just, hey, here's a thing, let's get together and make contacts. There are special events, and then there are like geographic parties, whatever. So like Island on the Air, Summit on the Air. So that's one. There are people that go to mountain summits and try to make contacts, and so that's just another way to have a reason to get on the radio.
So, cost of the license,
Okay.
of the technician license. What is it? Do you know?
It's like $12 or $13. So that it's not really the cost of the license; it's the cost to take the test. So if you paid that and you went and took all 3 tests or 2 tests or just 1 test, you could take them all in one session if you wanted to. And if you passed all 3 of them, and my God, there have been people that have passed all 3 of them in one test session.
I mean, you don't see what's on it. If you study hard enough, you can. You study hard enough, anybody can pass anything. Yeah.
It's like anything else. There are books you can read. There are books from the ARRL, which is the Amateur Radio Relay League. They create a lot of the materials. In fact, they're the ones I think that the FCC trust with creating the test for licensing. I don't think the FCC actually create. I could be wrong about that. The ARRL is a tried and proven.
The FCC chooses.
What's that?
They write the questions and FCC chooses the format.
Yeah. So, but the format's been pretty much the same thing for many years. It's multiple choice questions. Some of them have math. Some of them have knowing the law or knowing the rules and regulations. It's important. Everyone should know the rules and regulations. You should have a bloody copy of them next to you at your ham station, just so you have no excuse for violating them. Because it's really easy for people to violate the rules and regs. So yeah, but each test, if you want to take each test, you're on your individually, then you're going to pay for each test individually. So it's like $12.50 or $13 or $14. It's very nominal. It's very cheap, and like I said, you can do.
And then what are the levels? What does the 3 different levels actually allow you to have and do?
Okay, another great question. So you got technician class, general, and amateur extra. So that's 3 license levels. Technician is the first level. There used to be more levels. Don't worry about those. They've changed things. There are only 3 levels. Technician, general, and amateur extra. I'm a general. So a technician has access to pretty much everything above at 6 meters and above. And I'm looking at my frequency chart that tells me all of that now. So technicians can talk on a part of what we call 10 meters. So that's a 28 megahertz region. They have a sliver that technicians are allowed to talk on. Outside of that, anything 50 megahertz and above, that's set up for ham radio, technicians can talk on. And you can do a lot with that. But you can't talk on HF with your call sign. You can't talk on the HF frequencies below that tiny little sliver they give you on 10 meters. And I think, and that tiny little sliver you can only use what they call single sideband. It's just a mode of voice communication. Yeah. I'm trying to think. Now for CW, for Morse code, technicians can communicate on a lot of the, several of the high frequency bands. I'm looking 80 meters, which is in the 3.5 megahertz up to 3.9, up to between 3.5 to 4 megahertz. They have a tiny sliver that they can do Morse code on, or CW. 40 meters, which is in the 7 megahertz band, there's a tiny little sliver. Well, it's not tiny, but it's a sliver that technicians can talk on. And 15 meters, which is the 21 megahertz range. Outside of that, that as far as HF goes, and that tiny little part of 10 meters that you can voice talk on, that's all technician can do. All right.
And general
has most of the allowances of amateur extra. So basically, general has access to all of the bands, but with some restrictions. So on some of the bands, let's say technician has 0, and on some of those bands, general has this many. Can you see my hands?
Yes.
All right. Yeah. And then on those same bands between general and amateur extra amateur extra gets a little bit more. In some cases, it might be a really wide berth, but for the most part, amateur extra just gets a little bit more. And oftentimes, those extra areas that the amateur extras have are better because they have either greater coverage with other ham radio operators around the world, because they often have different frequency ranges that they can talk on from us. And some of those amateur extra frequencies might touch tastier, is a word I'm going to use, tastier frequencies. And there are less people on them, at least less Americans on them, because there are going to be more technicians and generals than are typically amateur extras. So those frequencies are usually less crowded.
I actually saw some numbers online last night. It was 700,000 registered ham operators in the U.S.
I'm surprised it's that low.
And there was like 1 million in Japan, and there was about 3 million worldwide, which means between Japan and the U.S. is over half of all the ham operators. But that's one YouTube video I watched.
Yeah, and that probably sounds right. America is a very free country. Now, Canada is as well, but Canada's population is really small. Right. Japan's population, I think Japan has 120 some million people in it. I can't remember. Somebody looked that up. But for some reason, the Japanese are fanatical about ham radio. And in fact, they're the ones that produce the most of that. They design and build most of the quality ham radio equipment.
126.5 million people as of 2018 for Japan.
I know a little bit about geopolitics. So so
even know they're the ones building everything.
Yeah. So they and now let's not discount American ingenuity. There are some ham radio companies right here in America with trying to avoid sounding
nationalist.
Nationalist, thank you. But there are.
What's wrong with being proud to be American?
No, right. But I was gonna say that aren't Japanese. I was like, that sounds bad. No, there are American Japanese over here doing great things for radio. There are non-Japanese people doing great things for radio. But there are American companies here in the United States. Hey, just right over the border in Tennessee, look up Tentec, Tentec. But there are companies making awesome radios for people to use right here in the United States. But the more mainstream ham radios that you see out there that are of quality, high quality, are typically companies that specialize in commercial radios and public safety radios. So you've heard of Kenwood. Now, some people you mean the people that make my my dash unit in my car, my radio?
That's still a radio, a radio, and a radio, and a radio.
Well, yeah, it is exactly. These are
radios. A radio is a radio. The way they operate is all the same. It's what power they're operating at, frequencies they're operating.
Well, right, and what they're capable of, and all that stuff. Yes,
right.
But so Kenwood, and under that name Kenwood, they make commercial stuff, public safety stuff, and consumer stuff, and then ham radio stuff, which I don't quite consider consumer, because in order to talk on it, you need a license. So I consider that not quite consumer, but it's not commercial. But the radios are designed very much from the commercial world. So there's
consumer.
Yeah. So there's Kenwood, there's ICOM, great company. They were one of the first. They were one of the pioneers of digital voice radio. D-Star, if you look up ICOM, that's their baby, D-Star. Now, they weren't the first to do it, period, for radio. You could go back to Motorola for that, which is, I guess, a very American company. I don't know. But if you look up P25,
Motorola's Japanese.
Yeah, Motorola's Japanese.
Oh, well, see, what do I know?
It's a very American. I don't know what to say. They're good with electricity.
Okay, well, I didn't actually know Motorola was Japanese, but I always, anyway,
Nokia is Swedish, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Nokia is Swedish, and
Nokia is Swedish.
Samsung and Motorola are Japanese.
Samsung and Motorola are Japanese.
for some reason, I thought Nokia was Finnish, but it probably makes sense that they are Swedish. They're Scandinavian either way.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
it's Scandinavian.
Anyway.
Geneva.
So yeah, ICOM, Kenwood, Yaesu. Now Yaesu, they use that name for their consumer products and the ham radio. Well, for their ham radio products. The other name people might know them by is Vertex or Vertex Standard.
Okay.
So those two companies are or were related. I don't know if they've gone to just Yaesu.
They're owned by the same.
But they're one and the same now, at least. So, and they have been for a very long time. So Vertex is kind of the commercial versus is the commercial and public safety line and marine radio line. So if you look up marine HF radios, then you'll see some Vertex stuff in that line.
I know for myself, and I do believe the other gentleman, Thomas.
Yeah.
We both have land that we can actually put towers on and stuff, but
bless you.
Right? Yeah. Rhett lives in an apartment. How would he do the ham radio from an apartment?
Ooh, one thing is make sure you're not violating any of your apartment rules before you put up an antenna. Scope out your options. Some
cheap.
Do I have an antenna in here?
He's talking.
Okay, I don't have an antenna example in my, because the antenna that I use in this room is outside on a pole that sticks above my roof line.
Do you have multiple monitors?
I'm on my laptop, so no, I don't have multiple.
Oh, never mind. Tell me what to look up, and then I can actually share it to screen and show it to everybody.
As far as like, so well, like you can look up this radio. Can you see this?
No, you have your blur
you have
on.
your blurs on.
Oh, stupid.
Your background blur.
It's in front of my face. You can't see that?
No, it's
localized. Oh, it's doing facial recognition. That's why it knows what to blur out. Okay. All right. Well, I'll just type it. So IC92AD. So this is a radio I used to have. Now, I'm not telling anyone to go out and buy that. So that's an ICOM radio, by the way. ICOM IC9. So it's a handheld radio. All right. And it's got an antenna on it. It's a tiny little antenna. And you can talk on that from your apartment. You can talk to several repeaters in the area. Oh my God. In the area from your apartment on a handheld radio. It doesn't have to be that radio I sent you. It can be any handheld as long as you have, oh wow, that is a Chinese knockoff. Make sure you type in ICOM. Oh, I've never seen one. And it was AD, not AB, but yeah.
Oh, AD.
Alpha Delta. Yeah. So those radios on the site. So those are, but that's just an example of a handheld radio. Now these were really advanced. They were capable of sending digital data, text. You can send text over the radio frequency, like your call sign and short messages.
That was a question I was going to ask when we had our next gap for a question. Was I had been hearing about how you could do analog and digital with some radios, and I was wanting to get more info on that because that fascinated me.
Yeah, I'll be happy to expand on that. Let me finish the other question real quick. Right. So for the regional or local radio traffic, you could get a handheld. You can get a mobile radio. So if you look up, let's see here.
Do you happen to know a good car ham radio?
Oh yeah, there are lots. Here, I'll bring up a website and let me drop a link, and I'll give you a whole list of them. So there's a company called universalradio.com. So I'm typically going to push the higher quality, the real, what I call real ham radios. They were purpose built for ham radio. I will only tell people to buy a Chinese knockoff commercial radio because they are cheap and it's a good way for people to get into the radio thing. But I'm typically gonna push, hey, get this stuff. So I'm sending the link over the text now.
There it goes.
All right. Yeah, Universal Radio. It'll say mobile FM transceivers. Why am I opening?
Oh. What?
No, ignore me. All right. Did you get that?
Yes, we've got it pulled up.
Yeah, bring it up on a page, and I'll just show you some stuff you can click on.
All right, you should be seeing it now.
So,
right?
so these are the primary companies. I mentioned Yaesu, Kenwood, and Icom. There's also a Linkle. There are other companies, but these are the four major ham radio. They've been building ham radios for years. They are built to FCC specifications. All these radios are either going through approval or they've been approved for sale and use as ham radios in the United States. A lot of those Chinese radios, the Baofangs and the Watsuns, have not been approved. In fact, the FCC have outright banned a lot of them from being sold, but some people still sell them.
I heard that on YouTube today. They were saying one guy, ham crash course radio. That I don't know if you're familiar with the.
I've heard of it.
He talks about it a lot, and he was talking about like he puts together kits for people where it's like, here's an emergency preparedness kit. Here's an FCC card and a ham radio. Don't transmit if you're not licensed, but here's a simple radio so you can listen to emergency things and like that. And he was saying that he buys lots of the Beifongs to put in there, but then also in the same video said you gotta be careful because a lot of these are not actually legal. Radios are technically illegal radios, but if you're just using it to listen, you're just listening.
Yeah. So let me expand on that a little bit. So the FCC ruling, the way I remember it and read it, was these radios aren't approved for sale in the United States. So they shouldn't have been imported. They shouldn't have been sold. But now that people have them, it's okay. You got it. You can use it. In fact, one of the things ham radio operators are encouraged to do is build your own radio. You could build your own insane radio and use it as long as you're using it on ham radio frequencies and you're not causing unnecessary interference or any interference to other services. So one thing I'll say real quick about emergency radios. By the way, that's a great mobile radio to buy. It's a little pricey, but that's a great one. And I'll tell you why.
I was just pulling some up because I remember we were recording, so I thought having some pop up every now and again might be a good idea.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So in an emergency situation where life and property is at stake, especially life, but the rules and regs say life and property, you can use any radio and any frequency you want to get help, period. Remember that. As long as life and property is imminently at stake. You can use any radio and frequency you want to, even if it's military radio, do it.
Yes.
If it means you can get help.
Right. That was the next question I was going to have is, are there any frequencies that can accidentally be transmitted and you're not supposed to, that are government or military frequencies, seeing how you can key in your own frequencies?
So on radios that are opened up to talk across like a wide frequency range, yes, you can accidentally transmit on a frequency you're not allowed to. And you should be careful. So when I say those four big companies have purpose built their radios for ham radio, they are set up to only transmit on ham radio frequencies. You can listen across, in a lot of those radios, you can listen across a wide range of frequencies because listening is fine. If you can hear it, then you can hear it.
But the military and the government encrypt their stuff, so it's all garbled anyway.
Not all of it's encrypted. Not all of it's encrypted. Some of it is transmitted in plain radio here.
You're never going to get anything that's not illegal to hear.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you can hear it, you can hear it. There's nothing the FCC can do about that. In fact, that's why they tell corporations and public safety and military, if you don't want people to hear it, encrypt it or do something, scramble it, whatever to keep people from hearing it. But if they can hear it, yeah, that's on you.
I know I don't know if you've ever heard of the AM scrambler, D-scrambler. That's what a lot of the encryption that they use for government stuff.
Sure. Yeah. If you look at Motorola's P25, they've got a whole encryption module. It uses bit encryption. So if you're an IT person, you know what bit encryption is. 128. They're using real like computer style encryption because that's digital data. You can encode it with a computer encryption. So I don't know what we talk about, but back to your mobile radios. Usually for a vehicle, the best radios to me are the ones that you can separate the head from the radio and mount the main unit like under the seat or in the trunk or somewhere out of the way. And the head, you can remote place on like the dash or wherever you want it. And usually there's either one or two cables running between that control head and the box. It just depends on the type of radio and the company that you have. If it's like, because your microphone runs into that control head and then the control head has a cable going to the main unit, and others, your mic cable and the control head cable are running to the control unit.
I love you.
Fresh coffee.
You get some creamer, and then I will hand you the creamer if you want it.
Not good.
Okay.
I might make another pot there
Okay.
because I'm there. We're gonna need to.
We might.
But
so that makes
Google has a good question here. What happens if you use a ham radio without a license?
If you are caught, you will be warned by the FCC. Typically, you will be warned. And maybe the most extreme, egregious case, they will probably, they might outright fine you. But typically, the FCC will go way out of their way not to fine people. But once you get to the fine stage, I think it's typically like $10,000 a day, as long as that whatever you're doing is continuing. So if you're causing interference, you can be kicked off of a repeater. Like my club can tell a ham radio operator or anyone else to stop using or interfering with a repeater because we own that repeater. We're the controllers of it. We want people to freely use it. That's why we have it for people. But if we find somebody's been abusive, either to other people or the repeater itself or whatever, we can kick people off. And if they continue to use it and we can prove it, or the FCC can prove it, and there are watchdogs out there, if it can be proven that person was still using our repeater after we've formally asked them not to use it, the FCC can come in and warn that person and then fine them if they continue that interference. At that point, they just consider it interfering. You're interfering with the operation of a station. You've been asked not to do it. Same case with using a ham radio without a license. If you are doing it and you get caught, they will have your butt. So it's best not to do it. Some people do it, and just take the test. Just take the test and get your own call sign. Don't steal someone else's, and don't try to slip by without using a call sign. And a lot of times you can tell who is and is not a ham radio operator just by the way they speak on ham radio. Again, I'm not saying ham radio operators don't say over, but 99% of the time you don't hear someone say over because it's just not necessary. It's too much. It's too much extra communication. So it's just something typically you'll hear like CB radio or something else, but it's not necessary.
On CB that often.
Well, it's just not good radio etiquette. But over, yeah, okay, yeah, you're done talking. We get it. We don't hear you anymore, or we heard you.
Sorry, I was gonna say I think the only thing I really know of where people have a stop is Morse code because they have to know when you stop a sentence.
Yeah, and it's similar. That goes back to the telegraph days. Message, stop, or message. break or whatever, and then you know, okay, this message is done, and then the other station can reply back.
Yep. The question that we couldn't touch on earlier because we need to finish that was the digital, the digital and the analog.
Oh yeah. So what was the question again? So like, how do you do it, or what's that?
What the advantages?
Yeah, because apparently you can do digital and analog, and then
So-
my next question after that's going to be, what typical things do people do on ham radio? What type of conversations are appropriate? You know, why would someone want to start doing ham radio? But I wanted to ask about the digital thing first because that was the order.
Sure. Okay, yeah. So digital. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both. One of the advantages to digital radio is that you can pass data with the audio traffic, with the voice. So like I can send you so in ham radio, I would send you something like my call sign. So it would show up on your digital radio with my call sign. So it's confirmed like who you're talking to. And technically I don't have to identify because I am like manually, I don't have to identify because my radio is already identifying me on your radio, and anyone else listening on that digital frequency, they're seeing my call sign. I can also send like a text message. Digital can also operate in a much narrower bandwidth because analog sound just takes up so much bandwidth of a radio frequency in order for it to be heard and legible or audible, that with digital it's just zeros and ones, and you can easily encode zeros and ones into a tiny little sliver of a radio, you know, section of radio frequency. So you don't need as much radio girth to get a message across on digital. So it's a more efficient use of the radio spectrum. So you can pack more conversation. So let's say this is a frequency range that we're using. I can pack more digital conversations in this range in tiny little slices, where with analog radio, I might only be able to pack 2 or 3 conversations, but digital, I can pack a bunch of tiny little conversations into one small group of frequencies. And on analog, you can't. You might be able to, like I said, put 2 or 3, depending on what
analog TV versus digital TV.
Oh yeah,
didn't have as far of a range because it had power loss and stuff like that. Digital has a further range because it can go further because you can transmit. You can transmit a smaller signal further.
Right. Yeah. So the range comes from. So a lot of times you're talking about the same power output on the same frequency, but a smaller data package, a smaller package that happens to be made up of digital data instead of analog data. And the digital data can be pushed out there much further than the analog data, potentially. It's not always the case, but theoretically that's the case, and most of the time that's what you get. What you do run into, so the advantage of analog is if the signal gets beat up on the way to my target listening station, that target listening station has a better chance of hearing it than the digital does. If the digital gets beat up, then you might potentially lose too many bits of data, and therefore you may not be able to discern what I'm saying. So if you've ever watched either cable TV or satellite or digital air TV, you're going to see it more with digital air and or digital TV over the air or satellite. When the signals get beat up on the way to you, either because of atmospheric conditions, weather, range, whatever, you will notice the audio do this like blip, 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 blip. It stutters.
Yeah.
And then the picture, yes, will block up. And that's just data. It doesn't know what to do.
Whereas, and most people wouldn't know this anymore because we're all old enough to remember it. But like but our younger audience isn't going to remember it. Your TV would get grainy and the picture would start to
That's where TV
get
static
taken
comes in.
over with TV static. But you could still see a picture, you could still hear them, you could still make out a show. So it's a great analogy. Yeah.
So
analogy. Yeah. It's a direct comparison.
Yeah. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both analog and digital. Analog, the signal, there is more resiliency in the receiving or transmitting station. Either the receiving station receiving a signal is like, okay, I heard it, it was staticky, but I heard what you said. Or I could see the image, it's a little staticky, but I could see what's going on. In digital, if you knock out too many bits of data, it tries to send.
You just see blocks.
You see blocks, or in the case of radio, you're going to hear just random noise because it's almost like the signal got scrambled.
Well, the receiver is getting ones and zeros, and parts are missing, and it doesn't know how to put it back together again.
Correct.
Because it has to reconstruct it. So
yeah, correct. Well, it's
reconstructing what it sees, and if it's missing ones and zeros, it's
right. And remember, a radio receiver is receiving radio signals all the time, whether you intend for it to or not. So you have to be able to punch your signal through the noise strong enough for the receiver to pick out that audio or that image or whatever it is. If it's not, it's going to get like maybe a syllable or nothing at all. So the problem with digital is when the signal goes bad, it goes bad really fast. But with analog, when the signal starts going bad or goes bad, it's usually, I mean, there might be a few cases where there's an abrupt, oh, I can't hear you anymore. But most of the time, it's the signal is just degrading, and you can tell it's degrading because it gets more staticky or other more nearby traffic starts to come in. Best example of that is if you're listening to your favorite radio station while you're traveling down the highway, and you're like, oh crap, it's starting to fade out, and this other local station is starting to come in, and you're like, no, I don't want to lose that station, and then finally you lose it. But usually it's a gradual occurrence, not abrupt. So that's the beauty of analog and the detriment of digital, because once you start getting out of range, digital just cuts off, where yep. Analog will have more of a, I guess you call it like a logarithmic downturn, or less.
Right, it's logarithmic downturn.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, it just curves down slowly.
So my other question was, for anyone who's not already into ham radio and who's going, well, I could get a CB or a two-way, what are some fun reasons to get into ham radio? What type of conversations do people have?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Well, it was what kind of conversations do people have, and what are good and proper uses of ham radio for the casual user starting out?
You can have geeky conversations just like this. You can talk about your day. One thing we do not, some people get on there and talk about politics. It's best to shy away from that, but it's not illegal or anything.
Everybody could do a little less talking about politics.
Yeah. So, but unfortunately, ham radio gets permeated with topics people, we don't really want to talk about. But yeah, there's just a sense of connecting to people. People you may never see in person. People you do know, but it's not convenient to see them. Like I just got home from work. I'm not going back out. I'm tired, or there's a quarantine on or whatever. I can talk to Thomas Allen. Thomas, where do you live? What city? Are you down in Randolph County?
Reidsville.
Oh, you're in Rockingham County. My bad.
Yeah, Rockingham County.
Just another Reidsville right here. Christian's Reidsville. I'm in Burlington, but I own the property that him and my sister live on. Me and my sister own it together. We'll eventually one day be in Reidsville.
Okay, cool.
Alamance, Caswell, Rockingham, I think.
And I'm Guilford.
Yeah.
So now I don't know about Caswell County. I think there is a club.
I'm barely inside of Caswell.
Yeah, he's barely in Caswell. He's barely in Caswell. He's half a mile from Alamance, half a mile from Guilford, and half a mile from Rockingham. Because
so you're up in that weird. There's a cool road out there, Osceola, Ossipee, and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's exactly where he's at.
Yeah, I know where you are. They're very strong ham radio communities in Rockingham County and Alamance and Guilford and Forsyth and Davidson and Randolph. A lot, and then the further east you go, they're strong like Orange County and Wake County, Durham County. Those all have really strong, large ham radio communities with clubs and repeaters and all kinds. So y'all should be sure to check them out. So we were talking about like what people do. So yeah, getting together, we can have a conversation. Yeah, you could do it over the phone, but hey, it's kind of
no, I can't.
Oh,
there's a bedroom above us.
I have no cell phone signal or internet.
So,
he might be getting internet next Wednesday, finally. So cell phone too, by chance.
By the way, Thomas, they're putting up the cell phone tower goes live next Tuesday.
Oh well, good for you.
Okay.
The problem you run into with ham radio is in a lot of cases it's kind of a public conversation. If people can hear you, they can hear you. You are not allowed to encrypt your communications in ham radio in such a way that other people can't listen to it. Yes, you can use different modes to not really hide, but modes that aren't common for people to listen to your conversation, but it cannot be encrypted in a way that like the FCC isn't easily able to hear you. So, I mean, you can sort of have private conversations in a lot of cases, but it's not really easy. But you know what? That's not, if we wanted private conversations, pick up the phone and call if you can, or send a letter or send an email or whatever. Different
language.
Or do it in a different language, which is legal.
Which that was the other thing I was going to say is because you can talk to you can with certain frequencies talk to the rest of the world. It gives you a purpose to learn foreign languages.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, yes and no.
Foreign languages.
Practice foreign languages if you want to. What you will find though, so somebody mentioned that there is only like 3 million ham radio operators in the world.
Ham radio operators, 700,000 in the U.S. and 1 million in Japan.
Most of them
use English.
Most of them use English, or for the most part, they're using a subset of English that we just call standard radio phonetics. So if you know your alphabet, Alpha through Zulu, Alpha Bravo Charlie, for radio, it's Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta and so on, Echo Foxtrot.
Still working on memorizing that.
Yeah, you'll get it.
I got it.
And so you use that and English numerals to identify your call sign. So yeah, people in Italy, in Russia, all these places I've spoken to, Poland, obviously the UK, even though there are different languages there. But France, they use well, I've spoken to a Welshman on radio. The Welsh speak Welsh. They speak English too, but they also speak Welsh. So if you know Welsh and you catch a Welshman, then practice away.
It's a great meeting to get on to and find out who knows Klingon.
Yeah. Kapla. Yeah, no. So yeah, you can, if you want to, try and practice a language if you know the country you're talking to and the people might appreciate it. And I've heard people do that on radio, but most of the time it's an English transaction.
I don't know about radios, but I do know when you're traveling to other countries, if you can greet them in their country's language, they are more likely to speak English to you and more likely to be friendly, especially in France.
So there's a...
Well, that's true here when you meet people who speak a different...
Yeah, and that's cool. I mean, it's not necessary, it's not required, but it is totally... I think it might make their day.
Courtesy.
Common courtesy. It's a beautiful thing to do. Yes, it's a beautiful thing to do. It helps promote more international friendship. Well, growth. I was trying to think of friendship. There's another word people use.
International relations.
relations.
I heard it
brotherhood.
worded that way on a YouTube video where they were saying that's one of the reasons why they set these. One of the many reasons why the FCC has these open is it promotes international relationships between people.
Foreign
Which
diplomacy.
Yeah, which it does, because you can get on there and talk to countries legally that we have some hostilities with. Not now, if we're at war with a country.
Russia.
Yeah. Well, if we're at war with a country, you probably best not to try and talk into that country. But
No,
there might be some issues there. I think there are some issues there typically, but that's if we're formally at war. But I know ham radio operators around here that have spoken to people from Iran. I've spoken to Russia, and it's not like we're at war with Russia, but we've got some turmoil with Russia.
The Cold War restarted. It's
Yeah,
okay.
I talk to Russia all the time on the phone for tech support. So
well, there you go. But there are some cool Russian cats out there that are ham radio. Those cats are crazy, and the Polish and in Ukraine, they are awesome to communicate with. They often have some of the craziest radio setups in the world, especially Ukraine and Russia. I don't know if they have like. What's that?
They have the least amount of regulations on their radios.
Yeah, and that's what my guess is.
Regulations.
I've never really looked into like what their regulations are, but that's been my guess is that they've got lower restrictions, and so they
it's not that they're lower; it's they don't enforce them as strongly.
Oh, and maybe that's the case, but
Until they do.
There of course, like here in America, you have rich people that are ham radio operators. Well, in Russia, you got rich people that are ham radio operators. And they take things to a little bit higher level because they may not be enforcing as much as they would be here. So I wish I could find the. I'll have to look it up for you, but there's a club over in Ukraine or Russia, and they have an antenna that operates on the 160 meter band, which is one of the lowest frequency groups we can talk on. That's 1.8 to 2 megahertz. And it's this giant, like it's like a crane, like that towers into the sky. It looks like a crane that you would use to build a skyscraper, and it has a rotating base. And this is their 160 meter antenna. It's just the whole thing is the antenna. And it's absolutely insane. It looks like one of those giant cranes up in the air, and it just blows my mind. You don't see that here in America because it would be highly restricted.
there's actually the world's largest radio relay tower is in Russia, and it's not even in use anymore. It's scheduled to be demolished at some point. They built it for the Cold War. They built this massive, it looks like a wall of steel beam antenna that they were using. Yeah. So you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I think it was, if I remember what you're referring to correctly, I think it was built to point towards the horizon, and like there's something with like we had a similar antenna radio station set up for American use, and the Russians obviously had theirs too, but they point these wall of transmitters or antennas to the horizon, and it just helps them communicate better around the world. And the bigger the array or the longer the wavelength they can talk on, you will find, if you look up submarine radio communications, especially for when submarines are submerged, there's a frequency area called I think it's ELF, extremely low frequency. And you're talking about wavelengths so wide that they can pass through the crust of the earth. So
I don't know if I'm pulling up the right thing or not. You mentioned
I would probably look up maybe submarine and ELF, or extremely low frequency, see if that brings something up for you.
I cannot legally speak on this subject.
ELF?
Yeah, try that.
I have a lovely NDA with the U.S. government that I'm not allowed to speak.
So if you
you were in the Navy, we got it.
So you see this picture you have up where it shows the current flow through the earth.
Yeah.
We're going to cautious.
That would be like the extremely low frequency. That or it would hop over the obstacles on Earth on the surface so much that it would go down deep into the ocean as well. So it would either go through like the crust or it would go around obstacles in such a way that they could communicate with those deeply dived vessels.
I also found this just while I have the screen up. Online practice test.
Yes, take those.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to tell people not to learn the material. I think it's okay to take the test and get your license and then do more learning. But I know people that had all they did was take the practice test and until they felt they were really good at it and they went and took the actual test and passed and they got their license. Totally legal, nothing wrong with it. That site's a great place for a practice test. There are other practice test sites. You just want to make sure they are using the latest edition of the test question pool. And there, I don't remember how many potential questions there are, but they're like hundreds or thousands, and they can have variations to them, like the numbers used or the frequency or whatever that they're asking you the question on. So
I've heard on a YouTube video recently they were actually talking about because of social distancing right now, they're actually offering scheduled online tests, which is something they don't normally do.
Yeah, so I don't think that's not wide use yet. I think there was a VE or volunteer examiner group somewhere that was able to set up and I think satisfy the FCC and ARRL that they could administer an online test without people outright cheating. So I don't know how they did it. I did see that that a group did do that, but it's not wide yet. Like for example, the VE group here hasn't done that yet.
So I know how they're doing it. It's you have to willingly give up control of your computer.
Okay.
To that website, meaning you cannot, if you open anything else on your computer while you're taking the test.
Okay.
It shuts your test off.
Okay.
Well, either that or they probably, and this would be the easiest way to do it. There's websites you can go to, and you do IT, so you know this. There's websites you can go to, and you can click a link to allow someone else temporary access to your computer so that they don't have a permanent backdoor where they can just monitor everything you're doing. They'll be able to see everything you're doing. And if you got a webcam set up, they can watch you take the test.
Yeah, and so there are probably something, and you could probably tell when someone's cheating. So I've given interviews to people over like Skype. Well, I've interviewed them for a job, and I'm asking them questions, and I can tell when they're looking off at another screen. And now they could be doing something legit. I don't know, but sometimes, like if they are taking their time, but if they take their time to answer the question, or they stutter on it, or they they look like they're thinking, but their eyes are darting over here to the right or to the left, that person might be trying to look up the answer on another device or another screen. But yeah, if it's all one computer and giving up control prevents them from doing that, then they just need another device off to the side. So I don't know how that VE group prevents that, if they even can. And they may just say, look, we can tell you know the material reasonably well. It didn't take you long to answer. Like if it takes you 5 minutes to answer the question because you're over here doing something and you're just sitting on this question, you're probably looking up the answer. So I think there is a viable way of doing it. I think it sounds like they found a viable way to do it. Hopefully they allow that to be expanded. But it sounds very troublesome. So usually at test sessions, you'll have anywhere from 1 to 10 people around here. Usually it's several people going to take a test at one time. There aren't enough volunteer examiners that can take control of a computer and make sure people aren't cheating. So that's just, that might work in some situations, but I'm thinking most situations, not so much. So I think the FCC will have to come, and the ARRL will have to come up with a method to do it so it's manageable. And yeah. And I'm okay with that. I'm totally cool with them doing that. That'd be great.
Yeah. Is there any way to currently take a test while we're doing social distancing? As you said, it can be small groups, and I didn't know if anybody was doing anything.
Unfortunately, because there are no, because it's not, I don't know if it's not or is not considered an essential task. But regardless, all of the test sessions are put on by volunteers. They're completely volunteer driven. The only way you can take a test and get licensed is a volunteer examiner who is a ham radio operator has to give you the test as to administer the test. And they can only administer up to the license level they have. So if I were a volunteer examiner, I can administer a technician class test or a general class test. But if you're trying to get an amateur extra test, I can't administer it.
Could he do he can do that for the club?
I hear a question.
Oh, it's background chatter.
Oh, no, I thought. Oh, was she asking a question?
Yeah.
He answered that.
Uh,
She's not completely listening.
Sorry.
Oh, well,
I
just
was saying, why don't you become that volunteer and offer that to us?
Because I mean, I could. It takes some training and time commitment. It's just like any other volunteer. The thing is, there are already people that do it. You can go to their test sessions in Greensboro, their test sessions in Forsyth County, their test sessions in Davidson County, test sessions, I think, in Reedsville, but definitely there's a test session in High Point, because High Point has a specific club for High Point, and they have their own test sessions. One or two of the people from that are in that club also do test sessions here in Greensboro, and they usually do them like once a month. But you have multiple tests going on in a very small geographical area. And some people live in Winston, some people live in Greensboro. Go to where it's convenient for you, take a test. But right now, most of the VEs in this area aren't administering the test. They're adhering to the state's stay at home. They don't want to get sick. A lot of them are older people, although we know this virus affects young people just as easily. But yeah, they're just kind of on pause right now.
Right.
What kind of things would you expect on at least the technician exam?
What kind of things, like what kind of questions?
Yeah. What would be a good study material kind of thing?
Well, so I took mine 16 years ago, so I'm struggling to remember exactly what's on. So they're going to ask you some questions, like some of the basic rules and regulations of ham radio, usually geared toward where the technician people can operate. They're going to ask you some basic science questions, maybe some technology questions about ham radio. It's more of a general knowledge thing, and there are some things you're going to need to know. Maybe some math in there, but it's not much. The tests get harder the higher you go. But yeah, I can't remember the specific topics on there, but it's usually.
At any point, do you have to know Morse code to take?
No. So somewhere in between, sometime after I got my technician class license, I was wanting to go get general, and I was trying to learn Morse code, but that is so hard. People that learned it either in the military, usually Navy and Coast Guard people, but other military branches as well, people that learned it really well as Boy Scouts, and some people just picked it up on their own for whatever reason, or somebody really good taught them. Those people excel at it. You could teach it, you can learn it at when you're in your 30s or 40s or 50s, and people you just have to make time for it, and you have to practice. It's almost like playing an instrument, and I practiced it, but not enough to be proficient at it. And I don't really remember much on it. I know some letters, but it has to get to a point where you're not counting the dots and the dashes that you hear. You just hear them and you instantly translate it to a letter. So it goes from, so for example, S is dot 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 or beep beep beep. O is beep beep beep. So
It's
three
dot,
dots
dot,
for,
dot,
so
dash, dash,
hence
dash,
hence
dot, dot, dot.
hence
Dot,
SOS.
dot, dash, 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 dot, dot, dot.
That's universal that everyone knows.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, for save
ship.
our, well, not, I don't know if necessarily save our ship. I can't remember. But anyway, that's kind of the international, maritime.
Save our souls.
I'm in trouble.
It's
What's
Save Our
that?
Souls.
It stands for Save Our Souls.
Oh, well, there you go. Because I knew it wasn't save our ship, because so that had gotten dispelled a long time ago. So thank you, save our souls. So, people that do Morse code or do CW on the regular, when they hear those tones, it's almost like hearing a musical note. And each letter, each number has a different tone, has a different sound to it. And they begin to recognize that sound and not the dots and the dashes. And that's really the key from what I understand. And because if you go to some of those frequencies where it's all CW or all Morse code use being done, you'll hear conversations flying by like what the heck are these people saying? How can they hear it? It's like, people that can type 67, 70 words a minute. How can you translate your fingers into letters and numbers and special characters that fast? Well, it's just practice. And
Basically
your
muscle
brain, muscle
yeah.
memory, and your brain starts to do it. It's muscle memory and your brain's recognizing it very quickly.
And to be honest, it's the same thing as learning another language.
Yeah.
So, but knowing it's not required for the general exam.
No, right. So I'm sorry, I didn't finish that story. So sometime before I got my general, FCC dropped the Morse code requirement because the ham radio community was kind of dwindling. Not a whole lot, but not too many people were getting into it. A lot of people weren't getting out of the technician class because, you had to learn Morse code. You only had to test at 5 words a minute, which is extremely slow. It is mind-bogglingly slow. Imagine typing at 5 words a minute. That is extremely slow. But all you had to do was listen to 5 words a minute traffic and then write down. And you didn't even have to write exactly what it said. You just had to write basically what the conversation was. And it could be anything that the examiners throw at you. But you just had to basically tell the examiner, like, this is basically what the conversation was about. And if you were able to do that, then you passed the code part of the general class test. But thankfully, the FCC dropped that and said you don't really need Morse code to use and enjoy the upper levels of ham radio. So they dropped it, and it's been gone for years, like 11, 10, 11, 12 years. They've eliminated that.
That's more something they put on the third exam.
No, I think Morse code is more
altogether?
considered a hobby thing now.
Yeah, it's not. I'm not going to call it. I mean, yes, it's antiquated, but it's the one thing that Morse code is. It's the most efficient way to send a message because you don't need a whole lot of frequency bandwidth and you don't need a whole lot of power to send it. And of all the signals you hear out there, the one that can be picked out the easiest or most of the time and all the noise is that Morse code. You can hear the faintest. You can hear the faintest.
Yep. It can also be done with lights. It can be done visually for anyone who understands it. There's so many ways to do it.
Yeah. So it is more of a I don't want to call it antiquated mode or hobby. I don't really want to say hobby mode, but it's more of a novelty mode. But there are a ton of people that still do it. You can even set up your computer or even either build your own device or buy a device that will listen to CW and translate it or transmit CW for you. So you can sit down with your keyboard and type out a message and it'll send it as Morse code out over your radio. And you can do it like that. Some people call that cheating. I don't care. If you want to
if you have the access to it and you really need to get that message through,
Yeah.
That's and it's literally switching one type of binary to another type of binary.
Yeah. And there's software, you can buy software, obviously, or those devices that will try to understand the speed somebody is sending CW to you at, and it will decode it for you. Most of the time, I've seen that software work, where if it's a good part, if the person's good at what they're doing, then the software will be able to read the Morse code that they're sending, and you'll be able to read it off the screen as text. Um, and when you're sending it, you still want to use the shorthand forms. We use shorthand in CW. I don't do CW, but in ham radio, we don't send like full on messages. We send like,
It's the old shorthand.
if you look up, if you look up Q codes, that's like the language that people use in CW, and those Q codes mean different things. Remember, I said earlier, QSO is a Q code, and it just means the conversation we're having, or a conversation. QSL means can you confirm, or do you confirm, or I am confirming I heard you.
Yep. You brought up a topic that we started to talk about yesterday, and you told me to bring it up again today.
Oh,
and you just hit on it when you talked about getting software on your computer. And it does tie into a YouTube video I was watching last night, where a guy was saying that trying to build up the ham community, that a lot of people are unaware that you can use your ham radio with your computer, and what all can be done with ham radio outside of just talking. And we were talking about using it to pilot RC airplanes or drones, using
so
it
many
to
things,
pictures and things. And you even showed me the one expensive radio that used to have its own IP address. And
you could assign it an IP. You could hook it up to a router, essentially. So so there are a lot of things you can do with ham radio. So that radio I sent you, which was the ICOM ID1, it was $1,000 radio, operated in the 1200 megahertz range, which is available for technicians and everyone to use. And you could have taken that radio, plugged it into your internet router, put an antenna on top of your house, or on the, maybe you have a farm and you just needed your combine to be able to have an internet connection. For some reason, you wanted your combine out on the farm to have an internet connection. So you take that ID1, plug it into your internet router. You have another ID1 on your combine or in the barn, and you can hook up a computer to that or a wireless access point to that. And those two radios would talk to each other with a network connection. And it's over a ham radio frequency, and it was completely legal. And you could, if you have a device connected to that wireless access point, like your phone or tablet, it would be really slow internet. But if all you were doing, I have a bug in here, if all you were doing was passing like basic traffic, like basic messages, you just needed to get out to the internet or whatever, or download corrections for GPS. If anyone knows anything about differential GPS, that's a whole nother topic. If you just needed a basic internet connection, then that could be useful and done over those radios.
So he could transmit his internet to me so I could actually get it.
But explain the speed you're talking about when you say slow, because that'll put it in perspective.
So if anyone remembers ISDN lines, those were 128 kilobit.
That would be
max theoretical. That's the max theoretical speed. Reality would be a little bit slower because you have things interfering with your radio signal when it comes to radio, more so than a hardwired line. But yeah, you're talking a tenth of a megabit. That's
literally his upload speed on HughesNet.
That's crazy.
Amazing.
To anybody who watches this, never get HughesNet. It's a ripoff.
So it was a great theoretical practice, but because it wasn't very practical, I mean, those speeds would have been great for sending basic messages, whether they were, textual messages or small data packets between programs. Maybe you had a chat program set up between two ham radio stations that were far apart, and that's all you needed it to do was just send text or small pictures. Then that was fast enough, because hey, we all remember the days of dial-up, and guess what? Dial-up was functional, and dial-up
is a dial-up.
Yes.
Oh wait, how? Okay.
Christian might not. He's only in his 20s.
Yeah, okay. But dial-up was functional.
I know dial-up.
Yeah, we did stuff with dial-up. We played games with dial-up.
Yeah, you can still play games with
I started
dial-up.
playing Dungeons and Dragons on America Online chat rooms.
Yeah, so it's not to say that it's so slow that it's useless. It's just it's too slow for you to get on there and play YouTube. We wouldn't be able to do this voice chat on 128 kilobits a second. No, it's not going to happen. But we could text each other back and forth. We could send files, even a large file. It just may take a while. So if the internet were to ever like go down, and you had some of those, if you had some of those radios, you could create your own network with those radios. You could also do, yes, you can control. We are allowed to do radio control. So you can do like RC planes, RC boats, RC cars with ham radio. There are just certain ways you do it to be legal. Your call sign has to be a part of the message or whatever that goes to that radio controlled device, but you can control devices. We can talk to satellites, and there are satellites that can talk back. Most of the astronauts are ham radio operators. There are people that talk to astronauts on the International Space Station. It's not often because, there's a small window that it's over your head at any given time. And a lot of times they're not listening, or you just can't get them. There are a lot of variables that go into talking to a fast-moving satellite moving around.
Through the
but it is totally breaking through the atmosphere is not the difficult part. It's just catching it at the right time is the difficult thing, and having the right setup. But it is totally possible. People do it all the time. People bounce signals off of the moon. If you look up moon bounce, that's a way you can talk to somebody on the other.
Asteroids. Yeah, I saw that last night too.
Oh wow! I haven't seen anyone do one with an asteroid, but totally possible. If you have the right setup and you can target that asteroid with the right antenna setup, yeah, you can bounce a signal off of it. People bounce signals off of the moon, and they'll talk to somebody on the other side of the state or the other side of the country, depending on how the moon is positioned and all that, and what kind of frequencies you're using and how much power you're using. Because there's a lot of degradation as that radio signal goes out there, and especially when it bounces back. But it is totally possible to have a vocal conversation or a Morse code conversation bouncing off of the moon. And people do that because it's a challenge, and technical challenges are fun.
And then you get awards for it.
Yes, you can totally get an EME award for it, which is EME Earth Moon Earth Communication. I don't know what the award is, but EME Moon Bounce are a couple of the names that they use to describe it.
So as far as practical uses for ham and stuff, I'm going to bring up a scenario just because everybody that's currently on this video chat right now is an off-roader. And so like if we were going out off-roading and everybody had a ham radio in their vehicle, if they were licensed, they could talk to each other. And if they weren't, they could just listen in. And that would be an okay usage of using ham radio.
Yeah, look, if you're licensed, talk. If you're not licensed, listen. Again, in an emergency situation, if you have to use your radio, go ahead and use it. Just make sure you know how to use it, because if you don't, you could miss the people you're trying to get, might miss you, or something else may happen. So yeah, that is totally fine. People are really tempted to key down and talk on frequencies they're not allowed to. Don't do it. Just go take the test. And when you can, hopefully it'll open back up. When things open back up, go get the test, get your license, and you'll be legal to talk on those ham radio frequencies. But there are other frequencies if you get the more commercial radios that are opened up. If you look up the multiple use radio service, MERS, MEURS, those are license-free frequencies. There are some restrictions with how you can use them, but for the most part, you can program those into any radio capable of using them, and use those frequencies. Only a few of them. You've got GMRS requires a paid license, and then FRS requires a specific radio design to use it. So people just need to be careful with that. That's why. And CB radio, well, we just know how bad CB radio can be. And CB radio has literally only 40 channels you can talk on. That's 40 specific frequencies at 4 watts. And you might be skipping over the guy in your convoy and they can't hear you, but the other people.
But which I've experienced already. So
yeah. Well, I've experienced. A lot of people have. So ham radio, best way to go.
You were talking about with the GMRS, it is $80, but then you said anyone in your immediate family could use it. Could that be translated to a trail ride where you have a handful of radios you hand out to people and it's your small group, only immediate family?
As far as I know, look at the rules and regs. The last time I did, it was for immediate family members.
That's what I saw last.
So, I mean, that you could consider an extended family member, immediate family, if they're, I mean, I think it's for family use. So what's funny is, the GMRS license allows you and your family to use that one license. I said immediate family, it might just be family. Where FRS is family radio, but it doesn't require a license. But anyway, GMRS license, you having one does not give you permission to let other people use GMRS in a group. Yes, it is set up and designed for group activities, but not non-family group activities. Now, if those non-family members have their own GMRS license, then they can talk to you, to your family with your license. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, I can see why you're saying not a lot of people bother with GRM because there is no test, but you got to pay $80 to do it. It's a really small group that's allowed to use it, on your license.
Yeah, and at one point, those licenses were only good for like 5 years. I think they've extended it to 10 years. I think. And I don't know if they have a renewal fee. So ham radio, once you get your license, as long as you renew it, which doesn't involve paying money, it's just telling the FCC after 10 years, hey, I'm still here, I want my license. It's free to renew every cycle. I know with GMRS at one point, you had to pay every time that license expired. You had to pay to re-up that license. That's what I was saying before in ham radio. We've joked that the FCC was trying to kill it, but I think they backed away from that. We've had different leadership in there, or whatever. I don't know what happened, but it seems like they've relaxed their stranglehold on GMRS, and I think the cycle to renew is greater on GMRS. It may have gone to 10 years. Someone needs to double check that, and I'm not sure if you have to pay to renew or not. Before, I know you did. Now I'm not so sure.
I was just wondering with the cost of it and with the fact that you can have ham, CB, or FRS for most other communications, who really, I mean, I'm guessing people do still use it, but who still uses it?
It's just another radio. Some people love having any radio they can potentially have, and they will. CB radio is the one that is the most hassle to me because you have to have a big antenna for it. The radios are low power, and it's just like FRS radios. They suck because they're low power and they're just these tiny little radios. That's all you get.
But if you're going on a trail ride, they work. You can have like
no, you're right. For that purpose, you're totally right. For that purpose, or to keep up with your goofy little kids running around on a cruise ship, if they allow you to have those radios, guess what? You probably keep up with them, keep in contact with them with an FRS. No, they have purposes where they are great. I will give them that. But when it comes to flexibility, you have that flexibility in ham radio and a little bit of that flexibility in GMRS. Everywhere else, you're pretty extremely rigid. GMRS, you can potentially do more damage, but in a smaller frequency range, because GMRS is only available up there in the 460 megahertz area, and that's it. Ham radio is all over the place. I mean, you can be up, like I'm looking at my chart now, and I'm looking at all frequencies above 275 gigahertz. 275 gigahertz you can legally use in ham radio. I don't know what you're going to use it for, but your license gives you access to it. Why not?
10-year license.
10-year license for GMRS.
Yeah, it used to be 5 years. They made it 10 years. And I guess...
No fee required for renewal.
Awesome. So they made changes. So you do not have to renew. And it may have always been the case. I think people make a mistake.
Any family member, not immediate. It just states any family member, not immediate.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's fine. So any family member. And you know what? You could probably say, yeah, that dude's my cousin. Who's checking? Who is going to look
Well, I consider him family, even though he's only my sister's boyfriend.
That can, okay. So by their regulations, that does count as family.
Yeah.
Sure. For the most part, as long as somebody has a license and can say, yeah, these people are family, you're fine.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not going to beat you up because guess what? If you're misusing GMRS radios, you're typically doing it up there in those frequencies that ham radio doesn't even have access. We can't talk on any of those frequencies that FRS and GMRS talk on.
I heard that
we have What's that?
I heard that was one of the problems with the Beifong radios is the fact that they added FRS, GMRS.
Yeah, and people would do things. Yeah, and it's totally fine outside of the FCC's ruling on those Chinese radios, and their ruling was only on certain radios, not all Chinese radios. But as a ham radio operator, you can program that radio to talk on ham radio frequencies and GMRS as long as you have a GMRS license. But as a ham radio operator, you can have any radio capable of listening on any frequency and even capable of talking on any frequency as long as you have permission to do so. So some ham radio operators participate in what's called the Military Affiliate Radio Service, so MARS. And I can take my usual ham radio, modify it, and talk on those frequencies as long as I have permission. So same with Civil Air Patrol. So if you look up Mars Cat modifications on radios, that's what they're referring to. You're modifying a ham radio to talk on Military Affiliate Radio Service, which is the military version of ham radio, because those people have call signs, and it's a military amateur radio service, and CAP is Civil Air Patrol, which I guess have some of their own frequencies, and you can legally modify a radio to talk on those frequencies, and you can use those frequencies as long as you have permission. So if you work for the Civil Air Patrol, and you're going to make your
like flight control, is that like flight control towers and such, or
sure, or you're a pilot, I don't know. It's for Civil Air Patrol operations. So whatever you're doing for it could be all ground operations, but they're frequencies set up for the Civil Air Patrol. You can dual purpose your ham radio for ham radio and Civil Air Patrol, or ham radio and GMRS. You just need to make sure you have permission to be using those frequencies, period. Yeah, go ahead.
I didn't mean to start while you were still talking.
Sorry. Oh no, I'm done. Yeah, go ahead.
See, that's the advantage of being on radio, because it's all visual and we can see each other. So it's really easy to accidentally start talking over each other. But on radio, you're going to be more mindful of it and pay more attention.
Yeah. Real quick. When you start doing radio more often, especially ham radio, I liken it to learning how to ride a motorcycle. When you learn how to ride a motorcycle, you become more cognizant of the obstacles around you. So when you drive a car, you are more likely to be looking for motorcycle riders around you, because now you understand, what it's like. So in ham radio, it's a similar situation. You understand what it's like to accidentally talk over someone. So now you start to try and control how you talk to make sure someone else can jump in there when they need to.
Right. I was going to ask, just because I'm still curious about the GMRS, is there an advantage to using GMRS over FRS?
Yes, absolutely. GMRS radios are not by themselves. By itself, the GMRS service is not restricted on radio design like FRS is. Remember, FRS, it has to be this little sub 1 watt transmitter with a fixed antenna. So that just basically means it's this tiny, well, it's going to look like this. This is an old GPS device. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's going to look like this, but have a little antenna, and it's fixed. You can't change that antenna, and it's going to transmit at less than
It's the little
1 watt.
walkie-talkies that we all throw in our camping gear and stuff.
Yes. Those are not very powerful.
Good night.
You can, if you look up GMRS rules and regs, you will be able to, you will see that you can use a more commercial radio. So I can't. So one like if you go back to that website of Universal Radio, those radios like that, you can buy radios like those. Not necessarily those specific radios because those are set up for ham radio, but you can buy radios like those and operate them on GMRS. Where you run into problems is the power output. GMRS is limited to a certain power output. I can't remember what it is. I think it's 25 watts. That's a lot more than less than a watt.
Well, I was going to say there's a 40 watt GMRS.
Yeah. Now, it may be capable of transmitting at 40 watts, or that might legally be the limit. I don't know. You have to look that up. It's been a long time since
it's on Amazon. It could be not right. Well, it's by Midland though.
Yeah. And
I think the 50 watts is the limit.
Okay, yeah. All right. So 50 watts is the limit for GMRS.
Thomas knew it.
I think for
Literally setting up
repeaters.
our website for FCC.
I'm sorry, what's that?
He was saying he's sitting on the GMSR website.
All right.
Over on
So
fiance's
it's 50. So it's 50 watts. So that might be from your radio. You may want to look up the legal transmit power for repeaters on GMRS. That might be where I'm getting that 25 watts from. So you can have repeaters in GMRS, and those they're going to work similar to ham radio. You're still limited on the frequencies you can repeat on. Remember, GMRS has a very narrow set of frequencies. They're all channelized, but it's a very narrow set of frequencies you can use. So yeah, like that little handheld radio you're showing right there, that's an FRS radio. Yes, it's capable of GMRS, but it's designed like that.
I clicked on it because I actually own these.
Yeah. Now they're designed like that because they let you talk on. Now that might be completely GMRS, but my guess is it can also talk on FRS frequencies.
Oh, there is a recent change.
What's the recent change?
Any GMRS or FRS combination is no longer allowed to be owned. They're not allowed to be used anymore as of September 30th.
So they probably, because too many people were abusing GMRS and FRS. So basically what the FCC has done is told companies like Midland and Cobra or whoever else makes a lot of these radios, stop making combination radios. You're going to make you're going to make FRS only radios or GMRS only radios. The beauty of GMRS, even if they're handhelds, they are allowed to operate at higher power than FRS. But yeah, so probably what was happening is too many people were abusing the GMRS stuff with their FRS radios.
So
does that
import, sell, or offer for sale of any radio equipment capable of operating under both GMRS or FRS shall not be permitted.
Yeah, and notice that's for sale. If you already have the radios, you can still legally use them. It's fine.
As long as you have the license.
So mine may not be the GMRS FRS radio. This one only says GMRS on it. It looks exactly like my Midland FRS radio, like it's identical. But
my guess is that if the changes happen, the company's probably scrambled and they either disabled on some of their radios, they probably disabled the FRS and they can only work on GMRS now, or they disabled the GMRS and they can only work on the FRS. So you'll only be able to get a certain number of channels. So I think there was 22 channels before in total. And GMRS had one set. There were a few shared with FRS, and then the rest were FRS radios. So all the GMRS radio frequency or channels, including the ones shared with FRS, are now solely GMRS.
Oh.
And all the FRS frequencies are now solely FRS that were already only FRS, if that makes sense. Okay.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I didn't know about that change, but then again, I don't really keep up with FRS and GMRS because I used to have GMRS back in the day, never really used it, so I stopped. I licensed on it twice, and I stopped because no one else had it that I talked to, and it was just
Well, like I was already sitting here thinking, I'm like, oh, it might be pretty cool because it says 26 miles on this one, maybe. And then some of these others, it'd be cool to have.
That's perfect conditions.
Yeah.
Perfect conditions if you're on both on mountain peaks that are 26 miles apart.
Right.
Yes.
But I was thinking the GMRS would have been good for, I could just get that license because if I don't have to take a test, that's something I can just go online and do.
Yeah.
And then they could have gotten a radio, and other
Dude,
families could have gotten a radio.
Dude, now, the way they have the licensing set up, it's a lot more economical. Yes, it costs $80, but once you have it, as long as you make sure to renew it every 10 years, just go on there and say, I'm renewing. It's free.
There's paperwork, that's about it.
Yeah. Well, and you do it all online. And it doesn't take long. I mean, the renewal paperwork for ham radio is a couple of pages on the FCC website, and you submit it yourself. People will try to get you to pay them to renew your ham license for you. Don't do that. You don't have to pay anyone. It's free and easy on the FCC.
So there's scammers everywhere.
It's not really scammers,
It's not
but
scammers. It's taking advantage of lazy people.
Yeah, essentially, it's like, oh yeah, I'll
Seems like it takes as much time to contact.
But they'll charge you. They'll charge you like $10 to do it. Well, you can go on now and do it in 10 minutes. You don't need to pay somebody.
Well, as I said, it probably takes longer to talk to them and pay them to do it than to do it yourself.
Yeah, or a lot of times they'll send you postcards. It's usually people that are older and not very tech savvy on the computer might be the ones that are paying somebody, paying someone to renew it. So now that GMRS is more economical, for keeping in contact with your family, dude, I think that's good.
I think it'd be awesome if they would extend that family to family/small club or something like that, because then you could, or maybe they use the term family loosely, and as long as you're keeping it to a small group of people.
So yeah, what you have to be careful of is if you do that outside of actual family and somebody complains, whether it's because of interference or or you were smashing someone else trying to use GMRS on similar frequencies as you, and they just don't like the fact that you were using it that way. If they complain and the FCC investigates, they're not likely going to be able to investigate it to the point to see you're doing wrongdoing. But if
they're just going to tell you, make sure you're using it properly in a letter or something, and then you got noticed.
Yeah, but there's the potential that you can be warned or cited for doing it, and yeah.
Well, I'm not saying that anybody should do something they shouldn't do. I'm saying it'd be really cool if they would take into consideration.
Oh yeah.
Small club activities would be a fantastic use of GMRS. There's enough channels, and
Oh no, dude, you are totally right. In fact, it would be nice if they let organizations do that like a club. It would be great if Triad Jeep Club, for example, could get a license for the club. So for club operations, well, even not club operations, if you're a member of the club, you can use GMRS anytime you want, as long as you're following all the rules and regs. Why not?
Guess another good question to ask is one we haven't brought up much, and that is because Bo mentioned it in our club meeting the other day, the National Weather Service. I saw a YouTube video where they were talking about public works, because you can listen to public works broadcast on ham radio and find out what's going on in your area for whatever reasons you might need to know that.
Yeah, and obviously, so you don't need ham radio to do that. You can do that on any radio that can listen to those frequencies. And what he brought up,
Scanner.
yeah, so those are the NOAA, the National Oceanic whatever administration, but NOAA weather radio. So a lot of those FRS, GMRS radios have a function. You usually like hold down a button and it switches over to the weather
Well, my
radio.
CB has it too. My
Yeah,
CB
a lot of
has that built into it.
Yeah, a lot of CB radios have it too. Not all, but a lot do. Usually with ham radio, you have to program those frequencies into memory, which is totally fine. But there might be a ham radio out there with a specific weather NOAA weather radio function, but that's kind of rare.
I don't remember the brand, but I know my grandfather had one.
Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, and it might very well be the case. I don't see it often.
That was also like 20 years ago. So
yeah, and so a lot of times you'll see radios come out with a lot of gimmicks on them. NOAA weather radio is useful, but it's also kind of a gimmick because most people can get weather on their phones or computers.
Yeah, I personally don't really listen to the weather reports. I could see if I had a ham radio on my Jeep and I was out in the middle of the mountains on a trail and I knew what the general weather forecast was for the week, but I didn't know for sure while I was out there how the weather was panning out. Because you can check the weather every single day on your phone and you'll notice that the forecast will start to alter a little as the week goes on.
So I said it's a gimmicky thing. It's kind of a gimmicky thing to put on the radio. It's like, look, your radio is capable of listening to weather radio. On those tiny like FRS, GMRS radios, those antennas aren't made for the frequencies that the weather transmits on. It's completely separate radio bands, and the reception is not very good on those FRS radios. Now on a CB radio, the antenna is usually pretty large. It can pick up that signal better. On other radios like ham radios and such, the antennas are more substantial typically, and they can pick up those weather frequencies a little clearer. So what I've experienced a lot with FRS radios is they're so poorly designed for that frequency range that NOAA weather radio uses that I usually have to like put the radio on top of like the car in order to help boost the signal. That's like I'm creating a ground plane. It just helps reflect the signal into the radio a little more. But if you're holding it in your hand, the radio signal doesn't want to come in very well. So I hate weather radio on those tiny little FRS radios, but on most other radios, it's great.
But I was talking more about like we were talking about using it for like Thomas. Are you an overt?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So Thomas is an overt. You're an overt. I'm an overt, which a lot of people don't know what overt might who see this video later. Overt's the off-road vehicle emergency response team. It's similar to the civilian emergency response team, except mostly we have off-road vehicles and do recoveries. He's going to join eventually. My brother probably will do something with it eventually. So we all know listening to emergency broadcasts and stuff. And then you said Overt actually does use ham.
Yeah. Some of them are ham radio operators. It's not complete yet, but.
Right. But like, being able to listen in on emergency stuff. And then again, like public works, because if they're closing a road down that hasn't popped up somewhere yet, you can be like listening to, I don't know how the public works thing, like, I don't know if they just have something that works like the NOAA, but locally that goes, these areas are having this work done.
It depends on the jurisdiction. Your image froze there. Can you still hear me? I'm gonna wait.
I hear you.
I hear you, Thomas, and I see you, Thomas. But Rhett's video froze.
Yeah, he just kind of froze there.
No. I will wait for him to reconnect. Rhett, are you there, Rhett? This thing may have crashed on him. Because we're still communicating, Thomas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can
Christian,
hear
are you
y'all.
still there? Yeah, Christian's still there.
Right.